Good evening and welcome to the March 7th, 2024 Park and Recreation Commission regular hybrid video meeting. My name is Peter Struck, Park and Rec Commission Chair. Tonight's Park and Recreation Commission meeting is in person for the first time since 2020 and also using video technology provided by Zoom. The Zoom video of this meeting is being recorded and will broadcast live via Zoom and will be uploaded to the city's YouTube channel later this evening. I would like to welcome and introduce liaisons for the Open Space Conservancy Trust who are joining us tonight. Chair Jerry Poor is on her way, but I'd also like to welcome Trustee Marie Bender. Welcome. These participants will not be voting members, but their input on the park zone discussion is going to be very greatly appreciated. Other city staff are participating in tonight's meeting, both in person and remotely. Other public audience members are listening to the meeting by telephone or via the internet. Additionally, the city has opened the community center, where we are right now, to provide public space for viewing and participating in the meeting. Welcome to all, and thank you for joining us tonight. Commissioners, please turn on your microphones, and will the city staff please call the roll?
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner McCarthy?
Here.
Chair Struck?
Aye. Here.
Commissioner Cohen?
Here.
Vice Chair Burstein?
Here.
Commissioner Markson?
Here.
Commissioner Westberg?
Here.
Commissioner Hay?
Here.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. City staff, is there anyone who has signed up for appearances that wishes to address the commission this evening?
Yes, Chair Struck, it looks like we have one public appearance, and that is Carolyn Boatsman. And she is attending virtually, so I'll be moving her over now.
Okay, thank you. Just individuals wishing to speak live during the appearances portion of our meeting tonight may do so by telephone, via Zoom, or in person at Mercer Island Community and Events Center. Provided, however, they registered their desire to speak with the city administrative staff by 4 p.m. today. We'll call your name or telephone number when it's your turn to speak. This is an opportunity for anyone to speak to the Park and Recs Commission. All remarks will be addressed to the commission as a whole and not to individual commission or staff members. If any person makes personal, impertinent, or slanderous remarks or becomes boisterous, threatening, or personally abusive while addressing the commission, I may request that person leave the meeting. When it is your turn to address the commission, be sure to speak audibly and state your name for the record. Your comments will be limited to 3 minutes. Staff will provide you with a 10-second notice when your time is about to expire. Once expired, I will thank you for your comments and move to the next speaker. City staff, please admit the first speaker.
Carolyn Boatsman, welcome.
Thank you. Greetings, commissioners and board members. I'm offering my comments as an individual at this point. I'm not trying to represent the views of the Planning Commission on which I serve. It's nice work to have this task of recommending the best way to preserve the great Mercer Island parks and open spaces. This is a very positive moment in the history of Mercer Island parks. We have solid community support for the process and for implementing it and for a new parks element in the comp plan. I think the staff memo does a really great job of laying out the issues. I think that there is a major decision is the best way to differentiate the protection of open spaces from parks, which are used for recreation. I recommend placing substantial open spaces, additional open spaces into the Open Space Conservancy Trust for the following reasons. One, the protection afforded by the trust is substantial. It is not at all easy to remove property from the trust or to abolish the trust. Two, the resolutions establishing the trust did not limit the spaces to be added to Pioneer Park only. Three, it may be difficult to draft zoning regulations for both recreational parks and open spaces, given that the vastly different purposes of these public properties. Four, There is an existing citizen oversight board for open space whose duties closely align to advising regarding the protection of all open space. 5, it is likely that the Parks Commission and the Open Space Conservancy Trust board members have different areas of expertise to advise the City Council. And last but not least, the Mercer Island City Code, if you examine the definitions of critical areas in the code, we are reminded that our open spaces are considered biodiversity areas, which is a type of critical area. This is in recognition of the irreplaceable and remarkable value of our open spaces to wildlife and native plants. This designation bespeaks an area that is quite unique when compared to other parks and supports a separate means of protection, I think. It may be possible that all lands on Mercer Island have to be in one zone or another. I'm not sure what the law is about that. But if that's the case, it might be better to have 2 different zones, a park zone and an open space zone, in addition to moving more open spaces into the trust. There's a little bit more detail in the written comments, which I submitted. Thank you for considering these comments.
Thank you.
You bet.
And staff, was that the only appearance?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we will move on to our first item of business, and that is the staff liaison report and planning schedule update. And for that, we welcome Recreation Manager Ryan Daly.
Good evening and great to see you all. This feels really good. After 4 years, we're all back in the same room discussing some really important parks topics. So thank you to the full commission for your patience and also your engagement online through this time. I'm going to share my screen here real quick. All right, success. Maybe. All right, just to provide a couple of project updates here right off the bat. Island Crest Park, I believe it might be complete right now. We've had some rough weather here the last couple of days. Actually, this entire project has been kind of up in the air at times, but a lot of hard work through our park maintenance team. The Field Turf company who provided us additional crews to see this work finish this week while we've had some nice weather, some snowy weather there in that bottom picture. But we've had really good conversations with the school district as well as the Booster Club, and thank them for their patience as well, as this project has cut into their boys baseball season just a bit. We do have the first varsity baseball game this Monday, so come out and check out that new turf when you have a chance. Bike skills area update. Last month, a crew from American Ramp Company came out and worked on site to dig and pour reinforced concrete footings. And that increases that stability for some of those wooden features you'll recall that we saw when we were out there last. The parks operation team had closed the facility during this time for that work to occur. It reopened last Monday on the 26th, and the trails are all fully operational right now. Our staff worked with WCIA, that's our insurance carrier, did a walkthrough of looking for additional measures to increase trail sharing and safety on those Island Crest Park trails. And additional signage will be installed to alert bike riders of upcoming road crossings near the trailheads, near that exit on 84th Street. So some park and natural resource updates. Continue to pilot and test out those backpack blowers there. That's that electric blower a staff member is using. We're working on our seasonal hiring. If this is an area the commission could greatly help us. We do have a challenge hiring seasonal labor at times. So if you have people who might be interested in working in parks and recreation, I can guarantee it's the funnest job they will ever have. So please send them our way. South Mercer playfields, we added some padding to some of the light poles out there that are adjacent to the soccer fields. And then we have a number of volunteer events coming up and one outreach event. 71 participants for 143 hours over the month of February. Pretty impressive. turnout early in the season. And with the planting season, we did plant 1,348 trees and shrubs over 7 park and open space areas. Sorry, I'm got the sun in my eyes. I can't quite see. Good problem to have today. On the Luther Burbank Sport Courts renovation, we're almost ready to submit permits. We're anticipating doing that as early as next week. Design of construction of that access road, and if my pointer kind of shows, it's this area right over here where that road will go in. We've been working through that, as you'll recall, on some additional permitting needs that had come about. We're awaiting the final plan sheet for the electrical plan and the conduit and junction boxes, and staff anticipate, as I said, submitting permits as early as next week, and updates will continue to be posted on the Let's Talk page. Talking about playground replacements, the Roanoke Park playground replacement has progressed into permitting, and we're starting with a pre-app with CPD, a pre-app meeting with CPD coming up shortly. The new play equipment will be ordered soon to get ahead of those long lead times. Some of us recall that challenge with Mercerdale Park, so we're getting out in front of that. Staff and our consultant have shifted to design some of the work at the playground replacement at First Hill, and that community engagement process will be kicking off later this month with a community survey and also the Let's Talk page, and that information is at the bottom. We had a great Saturday last week, and that event on March 2nd, our senior resource fair, we had approximately 400 participants come by the community center to check out all of the different offerings that we have. And we had 40 businesses and vendors here in the facility sharing park and recreation opportunities, youth and family services, support, police and emergency management support, volunteer opportunities, as well as just all of those other local providers. And we had three sponsors that assisted us in this program, Aegis Living, Bell Harbor, and Aljoya. And this was, I can't say enough how fun this event was, having our senior population come into the building and interact, as well as providers being able to interact with each other to further the services that we offer our senior community. So excellent opportunity. We're already talking about doing more of those, probably 2 annually. So more info to come, but it was a great kickoff to the first one we've done. Pickleball. The community center, we've expanded some of our drop-in programming, and we're now offering exclusive Mercer Island resident pickleball. Currently, we average about 50 to 60 players during a session, with as many as 85 on those courts. As you may know, given the size of our courts here at the community center, we can accommodate 24 players at a time. That results in a significant amount of sitting and waiting. And we know that 60% of our pickleball users are non-residents. So we took the opportunity to identify some available space in the facility, in the gym, and some times to offer resident only. And we've had about 10 people this week, or daily this week, partaking. It's worked out really well. It's increased their access as well as their court time ongoing, and have gotten very tired. Maybe they're wishing they had more of those breaks involved, but it has gone very, very well. Very appreciative community members who are taking part in that activity. Just to highlight one of our other partnerships we have here at the community center, we partner with the school district Pathways program. That's a collaboration with the school district that offers work experience to their students. These students provide a great level of enthusiasm and support us Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays here at the community center, doing a variety of tasks, sweeping the gym, cleaning around the facility, rearranging furniture, that kind of thing. And it takes a significant workload off of our other staff members, and really creates a even enhanced community feel here at the facility. So Kevin and Ben, as well as their job coach Carmen, are pictured there in that slide. And so one of the other things that we've added to this liaison report is to talk about the planning schedule up front here. Just want to highlight where we are on that March 7th meeting, and you'll see we have the Park Zone listed for a number of other meetings, as well as the annual report in April, and then also the library update coming in May. I know that it still looks rather light in the second half of the year. I can assure you that won't be the case. So we'll be adding when we're talking about some of the master plans and the further work we're doing on the playground replacements. Those will start to fill in some of those areas there in the second half of the year. But with that, Chair Struck, I appreciate it, and thank you for meeting here in person again.
Thank you, Ryan. The second item of regular business this evening is to review and consider approving the minutes from the January 4th, 2024 regular meeting and the February 8th, 2024 special joint meeting with the Planning Commission. Commissioners, may I have a motion to approve the minutes of the January 4th, 2024 regular meeting?
I so move.
Thank you, Commissioner Westberg. And is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner McCarthy. So the motion has been moved by Commissioner Westberg and seconded by Commissioner McCarthy. Commissioners, does anyone have any questions or comments before we vote?
Point of order. Since I wasn't in either meeting, do I abstain?
For the record, this is Andrea Larson, City Clerk, Commission Vice Chair. You are welcome to vote the minutes. You don't have to be present at a meeting to vote on the minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Commissioners, please turn on your microphones, and will the city staff please conduct a roll call for the January 4th minutes, the motion.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Markson,
Agree.
Commissioner Westberg,
Aye.
Commissioner Hay,
Aye.
Commissioner McCarthy,
Aye.
Chair Struck,
Aye.
Commissioner Cohen,
Aye.
Vice Chair Burstein.
Aye.
Thank you, Chair.
The motion passes and the minutes are approved. Now, may I have a motion to approve the minutes of the February 8th, 2024 special joint meeting with the Planning Commission? Is there,
So moved.
okay, Commissioner Hay moves. A second?
I'll second.
Commissioner McCarthy, okay. Commissioners, do you have any questions or comments before we vote? Seeing none, please turn on your microphones, and will the city staff please call the roll again?
Thank you, Chair. Vice Chair Burstein,
Aye.
Commissioner Westberg,
Aye.
Chair Struck,
Aye.
Commissioner Markson,
Aye.
Commissioner Hay,
Aye.
Commissioner McCarthy,
Aye.
Commissioner Cohen.
Aye.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The motion passes and the minutes are approved. The third item of business is our Park Zone discussion. And before I introduce and welcome our city manager, I'd just like to make a couple of comments. First, as Ryan Daly mentioned, this is really the first of 4 meetings we're going to talk about and discuss this Park Zone. And so therefore, I kind of think of it as part A of 4. So we don't have to get everything done tonight by any means. We probably couldn't. Secondly, just regarding logistics, since this is the first time we're meeting in person, and some of us have laptops, some of us don't, and so forth. So I'm going to ask the vice chair to help me out. So if you don't have, if you just want to raise your hand, or you can raise your hand in the, if your computer is connected appropriately. And we'll just work through it, and I'm sure we'll get better at it as the night wears on. So with that, I welcome City Manager Jesse Bond to kick off the Park Zone discussion.
Good evening. Is my audio coming through okay?
Loud and clear.
You guys look amazing. Look at that. Our first commission back in person. I can't tell you how with all the twists and turns of the last 4 years, I can't tell you how happy this makes me. Ironically, I'm out of town today, so I'm joining you from my hotel room. I hope my internet connection remains stable. If not, I have many team members prepared to step in. Speaking of the folks joining me tonight, of course, you know Ryan Daly, Merrill Thomas Schott is here virtually. Carson, I believe, is in the room. Carson, wave. Carson is new to our team. He's an analyst. I think he's been with us 2 or 3 weeks, and we tagged him into the Park Zone work. So welcome, Carson. Excuse me.
Jesse.
Also joining us. Go ahead.
Jesse, this is Ryan. In the room right now, we're having a little bit of a challenge on the screens. They're blocked, so the presentation wouldn't be able to. We can't see your face. There's like a weird screen over the top of it. We're working on that with IT right now, but just wanted to give you a heads up on that. Oh, looks like it just got fixed.
All right.
We're
All
good.
right.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I'm in Canada, so maybe this is some weird Canadian problem we're having. But anyway, also tonight and supporting us on this work is Eileen Kiefer. Eileen is with Madrona Law. She is outside legal counsel, and Madrona Law provides a lot of legal support to the city. So we'll take in Eileen if we need her. Carson and I are going to split the slides, and I'll ask him to go ahead and screen share. Okay. Commissioners, I know, I think we've been in front of you twice with the start and then the restart of the Park Zone discussion. Some of you missed the previous presentation, so I'm not going to repeat everything, but one of my goals tonight is to really give us a solid foundation for the work ahead. I met with Chair Struck and Vice Chair Burstein this morning. We did kind of a power a power review of this deck, and I think what we're going to do is go all the way start to finish. So as I'm talking, feel free to raise your hand, well, write your questions down, and then we'll come back. We'll stop screen sharing, and we'll do a extensive Q&A. So my goal tonight is hopefully we leave and you have a really good understanding of the work ahead, and particularly the park zoning work. Let's go ahead to the next slide. Just an agenda for the presentation, starting with, why are we here? What are we up to? Some quick touches on the comp plan, the pros plan. We'll take a look at some of our park properties. We'll talk about what goes into a zoning code. We'll talk about timeline and next steps. And then Chair Struck is going to facilitate a discussion with all of you. Next slide or two. All right. The deliverables. So why are we here? And I wanted to start with this slide. The council has directed staff and by assignment, therefore, all of you to develop a new park zone. And this is to be part of the comprehensive plan update process that we're working on right now. That requires a couple of things to happen. First, we have to write a new code, literally a new zoning code that describes all the things that go into the park zone. You saw an early draft, an initial draft of that a little over a month ago. Within that code, we also have to update our zoning map. And then within the comprehensive plan, so an entirely separate document, we have to update our land use map. So let's look at the next slide. That's a pretty significant body of work. Within the park zone code, so again, we have two buckets, code and comp plan. Within the code, these are all of the categories that make up a zoning code. We have to have a purpose statement. I'm hoping to touch on that a little bit tonight. We have to describe in writing what conditions qualify for a property to be in a park zone. So beyond the map, we have to say, using good definitions, what qualifies for a park zone. We have to write out the regulations and describe the type of uses that are allowed. This hung us up a little bit in the early work on this zone. And then we have to write out the development standards. So as improvements are made to properties that are zoned as parks, what are the rules around that type of development? And this was tricky in our early look at a draft zoning code because of the buildings primarily. And finally, when all that's done, we have to scan our new text and look for the verbiage that is new to our code and make sure we have proper definitions. If previous definitions existed, we have to cross-check and make sure they still apply to the new code. So that's what the Parks Commission will be working on with us over the next tonight and the next 3 meetings is formulating that text. Next slide, please. So the maps, don't worry, you won't have to develop a map, but I think it's important for awareness to understand the 2 types of maps that are in play here. The map on the left is our land use map. This is the map that is in the comprehensive plan, and it will be updated based on the new park zone. So what you're looking at here in a land use map is it's kind of a broader overview of the types of land use on Mercer Island. So for example, all of that yellow, if you can't read the legend, all of that yellow is single family. In the green is park, gray is public facility, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the land use map. And if you go to the comprehensive plan, each one of these land uses has a description that describes the allowed use. So within that single family yellow shade, if you read the comprehensive plan description, it will talk about, you know, single family zoning and allowable residential uses, among other things. So this map has to be updated. The map on the right, and we included this in your packet, we zoomed in a little bit and we published it by quadrant so that you could would help you see parcel by parcel what you're looking at. This is the zoning map. This is where we've taken the information from the comprehensive plan, that map on the left, and we've applied specific zones to every single parcel on Mercer Island. The zoning map is included in our code, so this also needs to be updated. In your packet was a list of most of our parks properties. We didn't include the landings because those are technically utilities. But within that table that we included, you'll see the property name and you'll see the current zoning. Most of our parks properties, not all, but most are zoned residential. Okay, so that's the tour of the work we have ahead of us, right? The text of the code. We'll be working with our GIS team once we have more direction from the Parks Commission, then to update both of these maps. This is important because all of this has to come together and be adopted as one, right? You can't have a zoning code out of sync with your land use map. And this is important because we're right in the middle of a comprehensive plan update. So it all needs to get done at once. We only update our comprehensive plan once a year. That's state law. If we don't get the work done this year, not all hope is lost. It can be done next year. But this is a year that we're undertaking a pretty major update. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. Next slide, please. Okay, so this question has come up a lot. There are other tools available to us to protect our parks. In fact, in your pros plan, objective 1.1, and some of you have seen this before, I shared this text at our last meeting. We said as objective 1.1, it's the very first thing you'll read in the pros plan, that our goal was, you know, to retain publicly owned parks and open spaces in perpetuity, and we listed some of the tools that are available to us. Zoning was one, conservation easements is another. I've been asked a lot lately, you know, when are we going to do the other tools? You know, when are we going to transfer the open space properties to the trust? So what I want to say tonight is our focus, our mission over the next 4 meetings is related to the parks zone. That's what we're working on, and that is the charge of the council. If the commission wishes to include in their handoff memo a recommendation to the council to pursue this other work, you have my full support. What the council would do then is they would receive that, and this fall, when we begin working on our biennial budget and our work plan for the next 2 years, the council would evaluate whether or not we have the capacity, you know, to take on another task. So I don't want you to shy away from your interest in pursuit of these other tools, but I do want to make clear that we're not working on those tools right now. Our focus is on the park zone. And frankly, I'm not prepared to dive in to all the other things, but know that if it's something you're passionate about as a board, consider including that information and that recommendation in your handoff memo. And I'm sure the council would really appreciate receiving that feedback and those suggestions. Next slide. I'll just remind you that we started and we stopped this work. We came to you in early January. We went to the Planning Commission. I take responsibility for the rollout. Didn't quite go as well as we had hoped. I stopped the legislative review process, which is a formal process that we undertake per the city code to review things like new zoning code. So it's paused, and now we're in front of you asking the Parks and Rec Commission with support from the Open Space Conservancy Trust to work over the next 2 months to see if we can prepare a revised recommendation on a new park zone. Once you hand off, and we do have a hard deadline here, once you hand off to the Planning Commission on May 8th, they will resume the legislative review process, which again is a formal process involving hearings and things like that. So we've got a couple months. Tight turn. Next slide, please. All right, so you've seen some of these slides before, but I just want to make sure for those of you that missed the last meeting that you have an understanding of, kind of the mothership, the comprehensive plan. The Growth Management Act, which is part of the state of Washington, requires cities, all cities in the state of Washington to have a comprehensive plan and to update them periodically. All of the King County cities are required to do a comprehensive plan update by this year. We started working on this comprehensive plan update in 2021, knowing that we had a big body of work ahead of us. So our update is due at the end of this year. That is state law. So that is a deadline we are working towards. Right now, most of the components of the comprehensive plan update are somewhere in development and headed to the Planning Commission for what will be a really intensive spring for them. And then they'll be handed off to the council probably in July, and the council will work on them through the fall. The comprehensive plan is a 20-year look ahead, right? So it's a rolling document. We're updating about every 10 years, and it's looking out another 20 years, and it covers a whole host of things. Next slide, please. So I think the important thing to remember is, so we have a lot of things we're mandated to do right now, but the council added in the development of this park zone. So this was one of our initiatives that we wanted to work on. There's another piece here. It's a new Parks and Recreation element. Element is just a different, it's the word we use to describe the chapters of the comprehensive plan. This isn't going to be a new element. This is basically going to be a chapter that references the pros plan. So we've already done all the work. We, the collective we, the Parks Commission, the community, and the council, on setting the goals and objectives for this Parks and Recreation element. The step we have to do is just incorporating it into the comprehensive plan. And of course, the new park zone, which you know a lot about now. Next slide, please. So of all the things we do in the city, I think the comprehensive plan is one of the most complicated. We are taking inputs from the state directives. They are mandating us to do things and do specific updates in our comprehensive plan. This update is largely focused on housing. A lot of bills have passed over the last 3 years that are driving the housing updates to this plan. We're also working on economic development updates. So things are coming down from the state. They're going to the Puget Sound Regional Council. They're going to the county. All of this is feeding into us and guiding the work we need to do. That information has been received over the last couple of years. That's what's being worked on behind the scenes. And then next slide, please. The comprehensive plan then is the mothership for most of the planning work we do on Mercer Island. And it then informs our deliverables, things like plans, the pros plan, regulations, codes. I was just talking about our zoning code. And it also has a really big part in capital budgeting. So that's how it's all flowing in and flowing out. But it's quite complicated. And as Councilmember Reynolds will share, it is a lot of work. We are really busy with this update. So thanks to the Parks Commission for stepping in and helping with the park zone. Next slide, please. All right, so that's the comp plan. Just a quick refresher on the pros plan, and I'll go a little bit quicker here. You've seen these slides and you've worked on the pros plan. Our pros plan is really fresh. We adopted this new pros plan in March 2022. Some of you were part of the process. We stopped and started There was a little pandemic disruption, but we got it done. It was a wholesale rewrite. So the old pros plan, we set it aside. We said it's time to freshen the plan up. We started, from the very beginning, and we rewrote the whole thing. It's work that you all should be very, very proud of. I'm certainly proud of it. I had the honor of working on this directly with all of you. We also partnered, particularly in that last year of planning, with the Arts Council and the Open Space Conservancy Trust on the plan. Next slide, please. I've already covered this, but just a reminder, the meat and potatoes of the pros plan is the goals and objectives section. It's chapter 4. We spent a lot of time on chapter 4. So we have higher overall arching goals and sub objectives, including objective 1.1 that focused on, protecting parks and open spaces. Next slide, please. So chapter 4 is broken into 8 broad goals. Underneath each of those goals is a whole variety of objectives. I wanted to mention here that as we, especially like probably starting the next meeting, as we start to dive into some of the specific topics that will go into a park zone, the staff and I are going to be going through that pros plan and pulling out all of the guiding policy to help you help inform your discussions. So parking, for example, I think I shared at the last meeting, parking is referenced throughout chapter 4 and in a couple different spaces. So we need to rely on that policy guidance to inform the development of the park zone. If any of you would like a hard copy of the pros plan, I've said this a couple times, but I want to say it again, please let Ryan Daly know at the end of the meeting. We'd be happy to publish one for you. I know when I'm working on things like this, sometimes it's just easier to have a hard copy in front of me. So don't hesitate to ask. We're happy to put that together for you. Next slide, please. Something else I just wanted to flag as you're dusting off your pros plan is the Parks Commission felt really strongly that each chapter should conclude with specific actions, really identify the things that we wanted to accomplish over the life of this plan. And the life of this plan is usually about 6 years. Sometimes we stretch it out to 10. So as we're doing our work and helping prepare you for the discussions, know that we're going to be looking at chapter 4, the goals and objectives that I just talked about. And we're going to be looking at the future initiatives just to cross-reference. So for example, in chapter 9, which is the chapter on open space, there is a future initiative that describes the work we're doing today. So don't forget to look in those both of those places. Next slide, please. It's really important to remember that the pros plan, like the comp plan, it serves a purpose, but it also has limits. The pros plan does not describe in detail how we design and plan for improvements at each park, and the park zone won't be able to do that either. We have other tools that we use that we've gone through extensive public process, to guide those very specific decisions in our parks. I used the example previously, and I'll use it again. Pioneer Park has at least 6 different plans that guide the stewardship and management of that park. Now, I will say that's probably too many plans. At some point, I'd like to see those consolidated. But the point being that, in this city, we are actively using all of these plans as we make decisions and recommendations on how these properties should be stewarded and managed. So the park zone, it doesn't need to be everything to everyone. We have a pros plan, we have master plans, we have other plans. And as we go through the process, we're going to be referencing these plans as well, and we're happy to help with that. Next slide, please. All right, one of the questions that came up, and it actually came from the Planning Commission, if I recall correctly, is when you're reading through the pros plan, is this operational or policy or both? And it's both, right? It really has to do with the unique nature of what we do in Parks and Recreation. We operate a whole bunch of facilities and assets. We provide programs and services. So it's both. So as we're going through the pros plan and really using the goals and objectives to guide our policy recommendation on the park zone, we're going to have to sort that out. Parking, for example, if you've scanned the document and read about parking, we left it kind of vague. So we didn't make our job easy, but that was because it's really hard to be prescriptive about things like parking when you have such a diverse park system. the main thing here that I just want to remind you again is the pros plan is the foundation for the policy work on the park zone. So that park zone that we're going to draft needs to be in alignment with the pros plan. We're not rewriting the policies of the pros plan. That work has been done, and it was supported by a really extensive public process. Okay, next slide, please. Park properties. So just a quick tour. I'm not going to go in detail. In your packet, we wanted to share with you the list of park properties or assets that we steward. What's included is the name of the park, the address. We included the pros plan classification. This is from chapter 5 of your pros plan. Pros plan classifications are done primarily for grant purposes and for the state to meet state requirements. But if you go, you can read, it describes, the purpose. We also included ownership, just for awareness. And I can see on the screenshot there that we actually made an error. Luther Burbank Park is actually under joint ownership, the city and DNR. We included the current zoning, so you can take a look at that. And we described the primary purpose. And we dropped in some notes if we had anything else that we wanted to add. So we just wanted to give you an initial look at the property list. As we go forward, we're going to have to ask ourselves, where do these properties fit within the zone? And where do we have some issues that we need to work out, which gets to the next handful of slides. Next slide, please, Carson. So remember, we've got a land use map and a zoning map, and we're gonna have to think about, where these properties fit. Next slide, please. For me, and I was telling the chair and vice chair this today, it's somewhat straightforward until you get to the short list I've included here, right? I think open space is a fairly straightforward type of asset in terms of allowed uses and regulations. I think we have a general understanding of what's appropriate there. I think most of our parks are primarily green space. Some of them are more active than others. But again, most of our parks don't have buildings in them. Where we get into some issues is the street ends and landings. Those are not straightforward. Those are actually utility properties. Aubrey Davis Park is an interstate with park amenities. Luther Burbank Park is clearly a park, but it has a lot going on. So as we think about writing regulations that work for Luther Burbank Park and also for an open space, you can see where we start to get a little twisted up. The community center is also an interesting property. We're going to have to decide where it fits. It definitely has park components, but it is, primarily a building and a whole lot of impervious surface and parking. So I think when we get to the end of this presentation, the chair is going to, facilitate a discussion and start thinking about, how do we categorize things? Where do we have agreement? Maybe where do we have issues? And where do we need some more information? Next slide, please. I wanted to go back through these slides just for those of you that were not the last meeting. I think it's really, really important to understand some of the pieces of this puzzle. Street ends and landings, and I'm just going to get out in front of it and say, staff are not recommending that street ends and landings be rezoned for parks. And that the primary reason is that their fundamental purpose is utilities. And that may not be totally apparent to you when you're standing on the shoreline at one of our beautiful landings, what's actually going on underneath the surface. But Fruitland Landing is a perfect example. It's a major sewer facility. It's one of the most important components of our sewer infrastructure on the entire island. Lying beneath the surface is a pump station. You can see the generator in the lower right-hand picture there, which is essential to keeping things moving when we have a power outage. We have pressurized lines, sewer mains, a storm main, and more. So some of you saw this graphic last time, but I want to share it again. Let's go to the next slide. So this is a map of what's actually going on underneath Fruitland Landing. What's interesting, and you may not know this, that green near shore line is the Mercer Island Lake line, AKA the Mercer Island sewer line. So that's where our sewage is going. And at Fruitland, we're actually connecting our infrastructure with the King County sewer line, which is that line that's further out in the lake. So I bring this back up to you again because when we look at zoning, we ask ourselves, what is the primary purpose of an asset? And we want to make sure our zoning regulations that guide the use and the development regulations align with that primary use. And so these landings are primarily used for utilities, which is why they're not in your packet, why we're recommending they be excluded. Now, one of the things we can talk about tonight, and some of you may disagree with that recommendation, but what other things can we do to make sure that they are preserved, landings are, access remains open and available, and that we can still enjoy them as park amenities. And we've touched on some of that in the pros plan, but this is the snapshot of street ends and landings and why they don't squarely fit in a park zone. Next slide, please. So also just to get you thinking, and I'm sure by now you're starting to contemplate questions, this is a photo tour of just some of the things going on at Luther Burbank Park. As I said earlier, it's really hard to think about writing regulations for Luther Burbank and writing regulations for the open space areas. And it's true, we may need to actually break those apart some way, or we may need to do something different for buildings altogether. We may need to address the facilities here, but Luther Burbank has a shoreline. It has docks, multiple buildings. We have the boiler building down on the waterfront. It's under renovation right now. We have the Luther Burbank admin building. You may not be aware, we have a caretaker's house where we run part of our maintenance team out of, and more. So a lot going on at this park. And it is tough to get our arms around writing development regulations for a park like this. Next slide, please. What's interesting about Luther Burbank Park, because our system has been developed for so long, we don't have very many active master plans, but we do have an active master plan for Luther Burbank. I think many of you haven't been through a master planning process yet at the city, but the master plan basically says, as this park is going to be developed and improved, this is how it's going to happen. And we've gone through a really extensive public process to set the vision for this park. So if you flip open the master plan, it literally shows, like, if we're going to add a picnic shelter, here's where it's going to go. So a lot of those decisions have been made through an extensive public process. So Luther Burbank has some protections in that way because we have an adopted master plan. You also have an adopted master plan for Aubrey Davis Park. That's a park that will be, I will not call it redeveloping, but it needs, we have failing landscape and things like that. So we did a master plan to help guide how we reinvest and work with WashDOT on that property. You'll be working on a master plan later this year, the joint Groveland and Clark master plan. So that's, it's really important to know where you've got master plans in the system because they provide really important vision. All right, next slide, please. And again, because I showed this last time and not all of you saw it, I want to go back over it again. Luther Burbank is a really unique park in that we don't own most of the shoreline. It's actually owned by the Department of Natural Resources. And so as we're working through the boiler building project right now and the dock replacement project, we are actually having to go and get permission from DNR to do these improvements. It's in very complicated contractual agreements that guide how we steward this shoreline. Also, we have shoreline regulations, our own and state regulations as well. So this is one of your more complicated parks, but what I wanted to point out, especially in the umbrella of protect and preserve, because we have all these layers, there are a lot of layers of protection already on Luther Burbank Park. In fact, when the city acquired this property from King County, it came with a whole host of restrictions. King County used state funds, state grants to acquire and develop the property. And we are bound by all of those rules in perpetuity. So lots and lots of restrictions, and we won't have time through this process to get into all those intricacies. I just want to share that with a property like Luther Burbank Park, again, there's a lot of things driving the decisions and uses already. And so we're going to need to be mindful of that as we work on the park zone. Next slide, please. not move on my screen. Did it move on yours, Carson? There we go. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Carson and he's going to give me a talking break for a minute.
Not sure if my video is showing, but good evening, Commissioners. Carson Hornsby, Management Analyst. I'm one of the staff members working alongside Jesse to help facilitate Park Zone development. I'll take the next few slides here, and the first park that I'm going to be discussing here is Aubrey Davis Park. Aubrey Davis was built in 1992 as part of an effort to mitigate impact of reconstruction of Interstate 90. You may recall that there was a big push by the community to keep I-90 out of sight, out of mind, preserve the surrounding community, and cut down on noise and things of that nature. So during that process, there was a number of lids that were built over I-90 to keep the noise down, really keep it out of sight, out of mind. Today, you see Aubrey Davis has turned into an almost 3-mile long transportation and recreation corridor that includes the Park on the Lid, Mountains to Sound Trail, the boat launch, as well as the Greta Hackett Outdoor Sculpture Gallery. But the thing that makes this park very unique is that it's actually located within airspace of I-90, and that airspace is owned by the Washington State Department of Transportation. And so the key word there is airspace, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about that here in a moment. All right, there we go. So Aubrey Davis Park, as I said, is not owned by the city. It's owned by WashDOT. However, there is a series of agreements that the city has with WashDOT. Most of them date back, or all of them date back to the late 80s and early 90s. You can think of the arrangement that the city has with WashDOT as basically there's two components. The first of which are the turn back and landscape maintenance agreements. These were from the late 80s, agreements that determined maintenance, landscaping, and site improvement responsibilities of the park. And then the second component are the airspace leases. So the airspace leases regulate the permitted uses of the recreational facilities, Aubrey Davis Park, within I-90 right-of-way. So it's an arrangement where WashDOT is saying, well, you can use this area for recreational purposes, but you need to maintain it and take care of the landscaping. So Aubrey Davis Park is currently zoned as a public institution. That's in Chapter 19 of the Mercer Island City Code. The permitted uses within the public institution zone are government services, public schools, public parks, transit facilities, hazardous waste treatment and storage facilities, and wireless communication facilities. Because the primary purpose of I-90 right-of-way and basically Aubrey Davis Park, the primary purpose of that is interstate travel. Staff is recommending that we do not include Aubrey Davis Park within the park zone. You can think of the highway as the land, and then the lids, which the park is situated on, is the airspace that's over that land. And so it's a very complicated issue when it comes to zoning. And so with that in mind, and the fact that there are several agreements that the city is bound to with WashDOT, it's recommended to not include this park in the park zone. Another unique property within the park system is the Mercer Island Community and Events Center. As Jesse alluded to a little bit earlier this evening, it has park elements, but it's a large building. It's a recreation facility. You can see the list of various amenities of the park up on screen here, from a full gym to game room, dance room, fitness room, various meeting rooms that can be rented out. There's a kitchen, outdoor areas, including the terrace, landing, and lawn, and then quite a bit of impervious surface If you look out the window out there, there's 222 parking spots. And then in addition to that, an emergency generator and an additional annex facility. So even though it has park elements, it's a unique property. And so when you think of the fact that it's a very large building and all the impervious services, it makes it a bit complicated putting this into a park zone. In addition to all of the recreational uses and some of those non-recreational uses and activities that happen here at the Community and Events Center, there are also some pretty important functions for city services that are housed in this facility, from the emergency shelter. It also hosts city council, board, and commission meetings. It's the reason why we're here this evening. And also there's lease spaces for childcare business, for a childcare business here. And then there's also department meetings and office spaces that are used by city staff. So it's not just the recreational uses that are important here at this building. There's some very important additional functions that happen as well. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the park zone components. Jesse had this slide up on screen earlier, but basically there are 5 different components that are components of any zoning code. If you take a look at Title 19 of Mercer Island City Code, Unified Land Development Code, there are a bunch of great examples on different zones that you'll see each of them have all 5 of these different elements. And so you can see them up on screen here, and I'll go ahead and just go through them one by one and talk a little bit more about them in detail. So the purpose statement. This is where we're hoping to kind of dig into after this presentation tonight. But the purpose statement is basically, what is the point of the code? What are you trying to accomplish? Zoning, sort of at the ground level here, is a method in which land is divided up into zones, and then different regulations are put onto each of those zones describing what uses are permitted and what uses are not permitted. So when you take a look at a purpose statement, what you're trying to accomplish with this code, you want to make sure that it relates back to the pros plan. City manager discussed the pros plan and how it's sort of the overarching policy document that informs everything related to parks and open space within the city. And so it's important that when we're getting started drafting this code, that we want to get off on the right foot and make sure that it's consistent with the rest of our policy documents as well. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we're hoping to come back to the purpose statement later tonight to see if we can make some progress on that in that area. The second component is required land conditions. So these are basically the criteria that a piece of land needs to have in order to be included in the zone. You can see the zoning map off to the right there. There's a much better exhibit that's attached to the staff report this evening that you can take a look at. It breaks this map into 4 different quadrants so that you can clearly see and read all the park names, see where they're situated. It's a little bit hard to tell, but right there at the top of the legend there is parks, and that's the gray. It looks like a gray, but it's a dashed dashed line. And so you can see all the park properties on there. Another something else that Jesse had mentioned earlier tonight is the classification list of parks within the pros plan. And then also the parks inventory that's also attached as Exhibit 1 to the staff report for this meeting. Those are some good starting points to see which properties are out there, what amenities do they have, what are their conditions, and you can kind of start to class them in certain ways to decide whether or not they should be included in the park zone. So the third component here are zone regulations. These are, you can think of these as the activities that happen within the park. What uses do you want to see happening at the park? You can kind of think of this as, say recreation facilities, trails, playgrounds, swimming areas, open space, what activities can people do in the park? And so these are some important things to think about as you draft the zone. Another thing that goes sort of hand in hand with zone regulations are the development standards. These are the regulations for any sort of modification to the land or the structures that sit on the land. So you can think of buildings, utility facilities, public art, and even wireless communication facilities, which we'll talk a little bit more about later in the presentation. And lastly, the definitions for key terms used in the regulations. With any well-written code, uses a list of definitions. You want to make absolutely sure that there is nothing left up to interpretation. When you're reading a code, you want to, or drafting a code, you want to make sure that readers are all on the same page, that they all have the same understanding of the code. And that's why including a list of definitions is a really important component for a zoning code. So I have just a quick example here up on screen. You can see, if you say the permitted uses include recreational facilities, well, what exactly does that mean? It's a pretty broad term. So there's just a quick example up on screen. Again, that's not final or anything. I just, pulled that from the internet. So it's, it's really up to the group, up to staff, up to the council as to how these key terms are defined. And I think this is where Jesse will be taking back over.
All right, we're actually almost at the end. Thanks for hanging with us. I hope this has been a helpful presentation. The next two slides are just a couple of randoms. We've gone through the last couple of meetings, all the comments and the questions, and asked ourselves, what else do we need to mention on this first pass? And we wanted to touch base a little bit on the telecommunications code and infrastructure. The early feedback, let me take a step back. The first draft of the park zone that was presented in January, one of the allowable uses was telecommunications infrastructure. And we got a lot of pushback. We don't want antennas in our parks. Absolutely not. As you can imagine, as some of you have already correctly pointed out, nobody wants these, but we need them, right? These are the towers that support a lot of the tools that we use, including, these little devices that we carry around with us everywhere. So what I wanted to share is the telecommunications, discussion is a little bit complicated. We have a code that regulates telecommunications facilities, and it is largely informed by federal law and the Federal Communications Commission. In fact, over the last, I don't know, Eileen can dive in here, 10 years or so, more and more control is being taken away from the city. And we have less influence on how these facilities are sited. So we are going to, and let me say this, our code allows antennas in parks through a whole series of, regulations and rules. And that's because we felt that we could site them there properly and minimize impacts to other parts of the community. So I just have to share this because these are tough conversations. I think you can understand that we have to put them somewhere. In fact, in that picture, that is what we call a macro facility. It's one of the bigger poles we have on the island. It is in the outfield of Island Crest Park. If you didn't know it was there, the next time you drive by that, you can see the macro facility. It's owned by Crown Castle. We just renewed the lease. I can't remember how long that pole's been there, but I think it's been 2 decades or more. The infrastructure, the use of the pole is shared by a number of entities. So think about your cell providers. If you look just a little bit down on that pole, that is a rack of lights. And so we're using the pole. Those are ball field lights. This pole will be adding a data collection station to this pole sometime in the next year that will run our automatic water meter system. So this infrastructure is really critical on Mercer Island. Go out and take a look at this pole. I don't know that we're gonna have the bandwidth to really dive into the telecommunications code while we do this park zone work. So what I wanted to tell you is these types of facilities are allowed in parks per the telecommunications code. And I'm going to help, Eileen's going to help me. We're going to guard against, writing a park zone that conflicts with the telecommunications code. So you're saying, Jesse, are you telling me that we have to allow antennas in parks? I am saying that. I'm not telling you to love it. I understand none of us do, but I will encourage you to think about other things. And if you need to put in your handoff memo to the council, it might be, the next time you revisit your telecommunications code, let's make sure there's ample protections to minimize impact to parks and open space, or, we don't want these poles in open space at all, whatever that might be. But I wanted to make clear that these are an allowable use in our code, and they are a really important piece of our infrastructure. So this is a tough one. We can talk more about it. Eileen Kiefer is here. She's, as I mentioned earlier, she's outside legal counsel, and she's done a lot of work on the telecommunications code for our city and other cities. So she definitely has more of an expertise than I do. All right, one more slide, and then we're going to bring it home here. And to that point of other codes, there we go. There's a whole host of other codes that govern how we steward our park system, a lot of them. So we don't need to reinvent all of that in the park zone, right? We have a stormwater code, we have a tree code, we have a shoreline program that is both, state and city driven. We have a critical areas code, we have lots of things. We also have many other agencies that regulate our parks, and particularly our shorelines. Our shorelines are heavily, heavily regulated. So I don't want you to feel the burden of having to draft shoreline code. That's not at all what we need to do. And it will be my job, with support from the staff and Eileen, to be looking. We don't want to create conflicts. So the new park zone needs to align with all these other codes. We're going to be watching for where we might have some issues. All right, next slide, please. One of the things I'll ask for some feedback on before we wrap up tonight, and we do have a whole list of questions, community engagement is on that list, is what does community engagement look like for you? We recently stood up a Let's Talk page dedicated to the park zone. So we broke it out from the comp plan Let's Talk page. The comments tab is turned on. We did overlook that, but we fixed it this week. We're going to be updating, providing updates as work progresses. We'll publish this PowerPoint on the Let's Talk page. That's a really good way to accept comments. The Parks Commission doesn't traditionally hold public hearings, but I did share with your chair and vice chair today that I think it would be appropriate to do something like a public hearing on April 18th. So we'd be working towards getting a final draft of the park zone, publishing it like 2 weeks ahead, inviting people to provide you feedback and to testify to inform your final decision. So that's one option. I was asked today if we have time for an open house. I really don't feel that we do, but know that there's a whole nother legislative process that will be conducted by the Planning Commission. And then there's another touch with the council. So you can think about that. We can talk more as we get to this, as we wrap up our presentation, and I turn the floor back to you. So speaking of, we are actually at the end. Carson, this is what your meeting schedule looks like. We just started to kind of rough it out. The next meeting, I really want to get into the meat and potatoes and starting to look at verbiage of these various sections of the code. We're going to have to make some decisions of what fits under the umbrella, what doesn't. April 4th, we should be reviewing draft texts and reaching consensus on the draft zone. I just mentioned the April 18th meeting. You should have, if we're on track, we should have a final draft, and then be working towards a handoff to the Planning Commission on May 8th. This feels fast to me. It probably feels fast to you. I will tell you, and you have a council representative here. If we can't get there, my plan is to go back to the council and just say we need more time. And what that means is that we'll have to continue this work next year. Because I remember I said at the very beginning, we only update the comprehensive plan one time. And we have to do both at the same time, right? You have to update the code and the comp plan at the same time. So I wanted to see where we got tonight, maybe get through the next meeting. And if you're just feeling like we can't get there, let's talk. Next slide. All right, we are at the end. I really appreciate your patience. I did feel it was important to get through a whole bunch of context. Next slide, Carson. So what I'd like to do, we're going to stop screen sharing, allow you to discuss. I'm available to answer questions. I gave you a whole bunch of information. I will do my best to answer all the questions you have tonight. I think the chair is going to facilitate a discussion of like, where are we? What do you think? How might we approach this? What do we want to focus on as we head to the next meeting? So when we leave tonight, I'm looking for some direction to help us get our materials ready. And these are fast turns for the staff. So we have to start working right away tomorrow so that we have a staff report ready for you next Friday. So thank you again for your time and your grace and letting us get through this big, massive slide deck. Thanks, Carson, for driving the slides. I'll have you stop sharing now and I'll turn it back to you, Chair.
Thank you. There's quite a bit of information that was presented. I'm sure we're going to take some time to digest it. But looking at your last slide there in terms of the questions, so I think one of the first things, and again, we won't have them all tonight by any means, but if you just have questions on the information, for example, one question that I thought of was thinking about the street ends. So they're currently, right-of-way public utility focused, but, I think most people would look at them from the surface and say, well, they're a park. And so is there a way to include them in the park zone, but then in terms of permitted uses, have the utility work and so forth? Or is that just kind of so complicated compared to the way it is now, where it's a right-of-way, but it's managed like a park to all extensive purposes? So that would be example of just one question. So let's kind of compare and contrast kind of those two approaches. I'm going to look around and see if, I think we'll just go by hands. Commissioner Cohn has his hand up.
Yeah, that was one of mine. That was one of mine, but another one I had was city manager has pointed out in the materials and in her presentation a number of different codes, things that some of us can or cannot get comfort from. Don't worry about stormwater management. Don't worry about such and such critical areas because things are. But what prevents those code provisions and plans, master plans, from being amended in the future and in a way that negatively impacts the protections that might otherwise be in a park zone? And I think maybe the answer is nothing prevents that, but that's the price we pay for democracy.
Yeah, I think you answered your own question, and I don't say that flippantly, right? We rely on our city council to adopt, ordinances that are responsive to our community needs and to steward our assets thoughtfully. So all of these regulations are codified in the Mercer Island City Code and may be amended by ordinances. I will say this, though, remember, particularly your shorelines, they are also under the jurisdiction of the state and sometimes under federal jurisdiction. So there's a lot of layers here. And I don't say don't worry about those codes. Those codes are really important. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to rewrite codes and we don't want to create conflicts, right? The stormwater code and stormwater regulations belong in the stormwater section of our code. We don't want to duplicate that. So I hope that helps answer your question.
Thank you.
Commissioner Westberg.
Excuse me. Jesse, you kind of hinted several times at this issue, but it seemed to me that one of the problems we had with the initial draft park zone was we were trying to cram too many diverse things under a single set of language, a single set of requirements. is there any reason, looking at the zoning map where we have multiple zones for residential, is there any reason we can't define multiple zones for park? We could have an open space zone, we could have a developed park zone, we could have a separate zone for Luther Burbank, given its complexities and other things. And that, to me, would seem to facilitate the task of really defining the zone and going through that whole list of requirements you need for a good zoning package. I think open space would be relatively simple, for example, because we all want to preserve open space and we all want to impact it as little as possible with development. So if we have the latitude to maybe define a park zone, open space, park zone, developed park, something like that, I think we could sort of divide and conquer this maybe a little quicker. And then on a more mundane level, who's actually going to draft this language? What is your expectation?
Rory, it's you. You drew the short straw. So no, in all seriousness. The staff will be drafting the text based on the feedback we received from you. And that's part of the reason Eileen Kiefer is here, because as we're going, we have to have kind of continuous legal review to watch out for some of those things I was talking about earlier. So your question is it possible to break apart and have multiple zones? And the answer is yes. I'm going to be honest, I don't feel it's possible to develop 3 different zones on the timeline that we're on. It's very complicated. It's more complicated than I can probably even explain. I mentioned it as a planning director today, and he just thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be tricky. But your point is well taken. It's what I'm wrestling with too. I think there's another option, which hasn't been very warmly received, but I'm going to at least mention it. We have a zone that's called public institution. It's kind of a funny zone. I am contemplating whether we shouldn't just put the community center in that zone, and it might be a better fit. I think the reason I'm getting pushback on that, at least as I've shared it, privately with some folks, is that there's a component of the community center, Kite Hill, that's very important to preserve. So we would have to think about, the community doesn't want Kite Hill developed. I don't want Kite Hill developed, just to be clear. So what would we do to protect that? So I think the public institution zone is something that we might look at. The other thing is I really think the hairball here, that's a technical official word, is around our buildings. That's one of the things that just makes Luther Burbank so complicated, is it's got these buildings that function in ways that are outside of Parks and Recreation. So I have thought about a carve out in the park zone that basically describes each building and what's allowed, right? The height of the building, the footprint. I haven't drafted any of that, but I think there's some other ways we could approach this. But I think, Rory, I just want to say this, and to all the commissioners, I think we're going to have to break these pieces apart. And that's maybe one of the things we can accomplish tonight, is understanding, what's aligned and what's not aligned, and where the properties that we need to think through a little bit.
Thank you. Commissioner Hay had your hand up.
Yeah, my question is about the airspace leases that were established in the early 1990s. And our packet indicates that those are expiring in 40 years. It's a 40-year term. And the terms of these leases indicate the approved uses of Aubrey Davis Park. And right now that's landscaping maintenance, approved concessions, special events, waterfront access, and use of sports and recreation facilities. So that is far less than what PI would allow us to do, government buildings, schools, So what happens at the end of that term, which is right around the corner? Do we renew the lease exactly the same as it was? Are there changes to the lease? What does that look like?
We are intending, obviously, to renew the leases. It's my gut is it's unlikely that WashDOT is interested in, negotiating a change of use. So I would presume that's what's there will continue. And I should just mention the way we manage the property, because the city maintains most of what we formerly know as Aubrey Davis Park. But we don't make any improvements to Aubrey Davis Park without the blessing of WashDOT. Even the master plan that we did for Aubrey Davis Park was not adopted until we had concurrence with WashDOT that what we proposed was in alignment with all these agreements. What Commissioner Hay is pointing out is something that we were trying to illustrate in the presentation, is the turnback agreements and everything that guides how we steward that park is actually more restrictive than the zoning that applies to that corridor, just by its nature. But those properties don't fit in a park zone either, right? They're interstate. It wouldn't make sense to zone as park zone. So the answer is we'll be renewing those leases. I don't anticipate that WashDOT will be entertaining any change in use. What we'll be focusing on, frankly, is renegotiating our maintenance terms, because we receive funding from WashDOT to steward the property, and there's no inflationary factor in that funding. So we've been dealing with the same $500,000 a year funding from WashDOT to steward the land.
Thanks. Can I ask a clarifying question based on that response? So if the lease were renewed in the same way, does that mean we could not do some of those things that are allowable in public institution? We could not put a school, we could not put a government building because that's not an approved use of this agreement?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. In fact, the lids, and Aubrey Davis Park is not all lids, but a good portion is these really complexly engineered lids that sit over the interstate. We are heavily restricted on what we can put on the lids. So there's no buildings allowed. And you may recall from the Aubrey Davis Park master plan, we did propose a new restroom building, which would be over on the west side of the park. We hadn't quite decided, is it going to be where the playground is or where the cross athletic field is, that area. But we knew from talking with WashDOT that building has to be sited not on top of the lid, so it has to push closer to North Mercer Way. So that there's some real intricacies around the engineering of Aubrey Davis Park that just absolutely prohibit the addition of those types of facilities. It's a function of weight and engineering.
Okay. Any other, Commissioner McCarthy?
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to the street ends. And so if they're not done in the park zone, then what would those be exactly zoned as? And then would that make it so that people weren't allowed to go in those, or could we have like information signs or something to explain about them? Thanks.
I knew somebody was going to ask me the zoning question. So let me take a run at this. All of the facilities that we refer to as right-of-way, so primarily streets, we have a really funny zoning situation in our city that is not typical for most other cities. So basically what our code says is the right-of-way is zoned to match the adjacent property. So if you stand in the middle of your street and to the middle of the street, if you're in the middle of the street and the property to the right is residential and the property to the left is town center, half of the street is zoned residential and half of the street is zoned town center. If you're following me, that's a very bizarre way to treat our right-of-way. If we can ever come up for air from all of the land use planning work that we are doing, we would like to fix that. Right-of-way should be its own thing, right? Right-of-way should be for the purposes of providing transportation and utilities. It should not be zoned that way. It should be its own entity. But our code has been like this for a really long time. So that's part of what causes the confusion. These street ends are literally an extension of the right-of-way. So what I've just described, and they have the same funny zoning, right? Half of that street end is based on the, the property to the right, and the other half is zoned based on the property to the left. But they are managed as utilities. So one of the things that we're concerned about is when you zone something that conflicts with its primary use, you create a whole bunch of headaches for permitting. So think about this: when we do a project for the city, like we go in and we put a generator at a street end, like we just recently did, and we're doing throughout our sewer system, we have to get a permit. So if your park zone says no net new impervious surface, and we have to site a critical generator on a concrete pad on that street end to keep that pump station going, we've now got a conflict, right? We've got an operational conflict, and that's not one I'm really excited about having. The alternative is, you could make a case to zone the street ends for parks, but you're going to have to write a whole bunch of allowances to allow for that utility infrastructure to function, right? So now we're getting into exceptions, and your code is getting really complicated. So we believe, as your staff, that it is cleaner not to include them. I don't know that you want to complicate your park zone with those types of allowances. Impervious surface restrictions on street ends is really tricky for us. Underneath the surface is a whole bunch of really important infrastructure. We're in the process of upgrading. A lot of that are pump stations. We may need more space at some point. So that's a way to think about it, right? We're going to get a permit to do a sewer project upgrade, and the backdrop is a park zone. The two are just not aligned. And I don't think we want our city chasing around variances and conditional use permits to steward our essential public utilities, right? I know I hear your passion about those street ends, and I believe I live near many of these street ends, but also I hope you can share my passion for keeping your sewer system operational and accessible, and allowing us to do the work we need to steward that system as well.
So just a clarifying question or follow-up. Yeah, I totally get that. And I think that makes so much sense. But what I mean is that if they're not zoned as park zone, will people still have access to them? And I think that's really what people care about the most is, okay, if they're not zoned as parks anymore, does that mean that we aren't able to access them? Thanks.
No. Well, they're not zoned as parks now, right? They're zoned in that funny right of way that I just described. What we have done is we put the street ends in your pros plan. So, and when we were working on your pros plan, we didn't bother explaining all the utility infrastructure, but they're classified as, I believe they're classified as mini parks. So they're in the policy document, and I don't have my pros plan with me at the moment, but we talked about street ends, and we talked about improving access, and we talked about, putting an ADA parking spot. So we still can regulate them and use them as parks. I think most of our street ends, Jason can probably answer, are open and intended to remain open. But underneath the surface, they still provide that critical utility. So nothing changes by not including them in the park zone. I just want to be clear. They're functioning as parks on the surface. They're in your pros plan as parks, but we're regulating them as utilities.
Vice Chair.
Just as a follow-up on the street ends, and I think this was asked before, but I'm not sure it was answered. Are there any street ends that do not have any utility purpose?
Needed to take Jason in for that. I think Jason, are you here? There you are.
I believe there are a couple street ends that do not have a utility purpose. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I believe there are a small handful that don't necessarily have a utility purpose currently. They were likely at some point in time did have one, but no longer have it. And Ryan popped on, so he might have the answer at his fingertips.
I think maybe Boulevard Landing may not have it also, although I may have the wrong one there.
So Ryan Daly, Recreation Manager, I was gonna say I dove into the sewer files, but I'm not gonna go there today. No, looking at, if you look in the pros plan where all of those landings are listed as mini parks, all of those locations do have either a sewer or a stormwater function associated with them. But why they're located as mini parks is because we are using them in a park-like way as a secondary usage.
We have what I can offer is, we've got a list. We didn't put it in your packet for fear of completely overwhelming you. We have a list of the street ends and landings and all of the infrastructure that they include. There it is. So you can start to see, and we can put this, I'll ask Meryl to just make note of this for the next packet. We'll clean this list up and we'll include it so you have it for reference. All right, thanks for sharing.
Commissioner Markson has a question.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Markson. I was curious if there's a minimum size of a zone, like how much you apply to a particular zone? Like you mentioned, and what I'm trying to ask is, you mentioned maybe we would have carve outs. And if you define a zone, you would say, well, there's the admin building and it has this size, but could you just make the admin building a different zone and inside the park zone?
That would not be our preferred approach because we're zoning based on property lines essentially.
Okay.
When I was talking about the carve out, I think Eileen is probably going to reach through the screen here and shake me, but there are some tools. There she is. She's coming to shake me. There are, if you look at the public institution zone, if you really want to go there, the schools were zoned based on what I describe as exceptions. So each school, there's a height limit defined for the schools in the public institution zone. There's setbacks. I call that zoning by exception, where you say, okay, look, Luther Burbank is in the park zone, but it has a building and that building has these allowances. It's not my favorite approach to zoning. We try not to do that, but it is a tool we could possibly explore. So it allows for the building to be there, but doesn't allow for other buildings to be there, or other buildings to be added to the park system. So Eileen and I haven't talked about that a whole lot, but she may have some advice to offer.
I don't know that I have much to offer. I think City Manager Bond has covered it pretty well. Is typically zoning would be done on a parcel by parcel basis. Indeed, it's not desirable to have parcels that have mixed zones. That creates difficulties for the property owners. So I don't think that would be a recommended approach, but City Manager Bond, I think, said it really beautifully about how you can accommodate existing uses by just detailing the uses allowed within particular zones.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go with Commissioner Cohen.
I have two additional things that I think fit within this agenda thing about questions maybe that need to be looked into. We asked this question, or somebody did, at I think the joint meeting, and it was with respect to my colleagues on my left here. How sure is it that the Open Space Conservancy Trust provisions would take precedence over whatever is done with the park zone? I realize that somebody answered that question from staff or consultants the last time, said, well, the more specific one controls. But it's going to be important for my thinking, at least, to know a very specific answer to that. Doesn't have to be tonight, but that's one thing and I'm sure that Eileen can address that at an appropriate time. The second clarification, may I? This picks up on the subject, not about street ends, but for example, there are several other greenbelt trails on the island that perfectly fit within the PROS plan protection for environmentally sensitive areas. I don't even know who own these. So for example, who owns the Flurry Trail coming down and going across to the west there, which is a very beautiful piece of property? I don't know if that's privately owned or city owned. A couple of other ones. The, at 59th Street near 84th Avenue, if you walk down, there's that little trail with skunk cabbage in there that goes down and then connects up through a driveway down. And you can walk all the way down to, of course, to Groveland from there. The third one is 92nd Avenue. You can walk down where there's that little water course that goes, and you can walk all the way down to, I think it's East Mercer Way, and then down to Avalon, or no, down to Clark Beach if you want to. So if those are publicly owned, then I think it might be worth considering whether, even though they're small, whether they ought to be protected. And there's no utility infrastructure on those, because I go on them all the time.
Yeah,
So-
we did not add trails to the list, and they're a little bit tricky. Jason just popped on. Some of them are attached to utilities. Some of them are easements. So I will need to get with my staff team to see what it's going to take to populate your property list with the list of trails. I generally agree, if we own a property outright and its primary purpose is trail, it could be included in your park zone. I do agree with that, Commissioner Cohen. Jason, did you want to add some color to the trail question?
You hit exactly where I was going to hit. They may not have an existing utility, but there might be an easement there. We have a list, we have a map, we have a location of all of our what we consider either park or right-of-way trails. Maintenance is shared between those functions between the two teams, depending on the location, and it's moved back and forth over the years. So we can cross-reference that list with what we have in front of us and circle back with the commission.
The trails, I'll just plant a seed. If the trail analysis gets too complicated and you're really wanting to complete the mission and get the park zone established this year, I would recommend that would be a good 2.0 exercise for possibly next year. Just to say that. And then Commissioner Cohen, you asked a question. You started with, and it's already escaped me, but I wanted to answer it. Can you remind me what your first question was?
That was about the Open Space Conservancy Trust.
Oh, all right. So, yeah, what your question is, what controls, and I want to remind you that, and let's not take Pioneer Park. Let's take something else like Luther Burbank. Luther Burbank has a whole host of layers of regulations. If the council wanted to sell Luther Burbank, they would not be able to do it without going back and unwinding that acquisition grants from the 70s. So that would be a layer of complication, so it's like the council couldn't just sell Luther Burbank Park. They couldn't use it for something other than what was described in the original acquisition documents. So what controls is a whole bunch of things. And certainly I would say, yes, the most restrictive controls, but we have that park is so complicated with acquisition documents, a master plan, other ordinances, regulations, joint ownership. Pioneer Park is a little bit different. It is stewarded by the Open Space Conservancy Trust, which was created by the City Council. Somebody asked in the Q&A documents, can the council undo it? Yes, they can. It's a high bar to undo the trust, but they do retain that authority. Absent that, the planning documents that are associated with Pioneer Park would govern. What we'll have to watch for though at the creation of a park zone is where we might create conflicts. And that's not our intent. But I would say generally the most restrictive the most restrictive regulation governs, but it ultimately depends on what it is and how it can be modified. Like the trust could adopt a new Pioneer Park master plan that would allow for some changes.
Yeah.
So it's not a straightforward answer.
Yeah, what I was concerned about primarily, putting aside Luther Burbank, because that wasn't what I was thinking about, because Rory's been on the Open Space Conservancy Trust, I've been on, Jerry, Marie, a lot of people have been on it, and what it would be important for me to know, probably no disrespect, probably with with Eileen weighing in on this at some point, is, for example, if Pioneer Park is a park and we create a park zone that permits large wireless or permits government buildings, I would like to know whether that would apply to Pioneer Park. Okay? And I understand the more specific controls. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I know all that stuff, you know, but I also know that creative lawyers and other people and creative community members can, you know, figure out ways of addressing things. So in any event, that's my thought on that. I understand what you're saying about multi-use and kind of facility. One last thing on the trail thing. I was thinking about what former council member Grouse always wanted to have, a trail system that went from the south end to the north end, east, west, and you know, not everybody agreed with that, or certainly not with everything that that Dan Grouse espoused. But that's something that I think a lot of people agree with. And if it's owned by the city and there aren't other restrictions and there's no infrastructure and everything, then I think most people probably, like you said, Jesse, don't want to have buildings on those trails, don't want to have, you know, large wireless facilities, don't want to have whatever it is, you know, in the absence of emergencies and all that. So that was kind of a guiding thought that I had on that as well. Thank you.
Sure. So I think for the next meeting, and Meryl's taking some notes for me here, is we'll spend a little time talking about the open space trust and get you answers to those questions more succinctly than what I just said a moment ago. And we'll also attempt to describe the trail system. It's a bit of a complicated animal, but I appreciate the comments.
And I'm not saying that I have, you know, I'm just one person expressing it. That may not be as important to other people, but I spent a lot of time on them and have worked a lot over the years trying to create them and keep them.
Are there other questions, Commissioner McCarthy?
Thank you. Something I wanted us to keep in mind is I know that a lot of people have been very vocal about not having any transit stops in the parks. And I also don't think we want to have anything beyond, you know, letting the bus drop somebody off. But I wanted to be mindful that we want to be inclusive in the parks of everybody, and not everybody has the capability of going from the street into a park necessarily. For example, Island Crest Way, if you got dropped off on the street and you are in a wheelchair or you have limited mobility, for you to get from Island Crest Way all the way into the stands at the ball field could be a real, something that could be really hard for you. Even, I don't know where the bus stop is around here, but to get from the street up to the community center, if you have limited mobility, that could be really challenging for you. If we had allowances or somehow could include that, the ability for buses to come into the parking lot of the community center and drop somebody off directly, or come into the Island Crest Park and drop somebody off, that could make a real difference to people in our community who have those challenges. And so I just wanted to include that in there and have that be something that we think about, because, you know, we want the parks to be for everybody. Thanks.
Commissioner Hay?
I was hoping somebody could speak to the complexity referenced as the reason for not including Aubrey Davis in the park zone. So, you know, it was mentioned a couple of times that the complex overlay of these agreements, which dictate the maintenance and use, are the reason for not including it. But the uses seem pretty simple and restrictive. So where is the complexity, and little further information about why we wouldn't include it in the park zone?
So it's a similar analogy to the discussion we just had on street ends and landings that have utilities. The land that is Aubrey Davis Park is an interstate, and it has its primary purpose is transportation. We have greatly benefited from the infrastructure that has been added to the interstate that makes up most of Aubrey Davis Park. But you can think about when WashDOT does improvements on the interstate, they come to the city and get permits, just like we get permits for our project. So imagine permitting an interstate project against a park zone. It just doesn't make sense. And so I want you to think about some other things then is you probably want to regulate impervious surface, right? You want to make sure that, you know, our parks are not paved over. And we feel the same way about Aubrey Davis Park. And we have provided some guidance in the master plan about impervious surface in Aubrey Davis Park. But it wouldn't be appropriate to zone I-90 interstate as parks and limit impervious surface because WashDOT from time to time will need to make improvements and modification that most certainly will change things like concrete and retaining walls. So those are the conflicts we're trying to avoid. I know what you see on top is a park, but the land underneath is a critical statewide transportation interstate. So what I would challenge you to think about, and I do see some real problems if we go there, not to mention the state kind of scratching their head at us, but I would ask you if that is not a satisfactory answer, what else could we do that would help satisfy whatever concerns there are related to Aubrey Davis Park, right? Rezoning a section of I-90 as park probably doesn't make sense, but what other tools might we recommend the city council consider us working on to make sure that Aubrey Davis Parks remains as Aubrey Davis Park?
Councilmember Reynolds.
I just want to clarify one thing that I think I heard and make sure I understand it. You've said that I-90 is the land, obviously. We've got, in effect, a second story of land over the land in the lid. Are you saying it's not possible to zone the second story different than the zone of what's underneath?
You know, we've actually looked at it. It's like a sandwich, right? You've got a structure on top of I-90. It may be possible. We're puzzling over how would you zone a structure that is part of an airspace lease. I'm just not, we're not there yet and trying to figure it out. So, I mean, we wouldn't zone a top deck of a parking garage different than the bottom deck of a parking garage. And that's kind of the way I think about it. Yeah, I mentioned earlier, it's really complicated.
Any other questions? Okay, what I'd like to do is I'd like to come back to Commissioner Westberg's suggestion. And this is basically was to bifurcate. And again, if you think of the three, the purpose, zoning designation, land use regs, development standards, definitions, and we say, if we have, call it open space parcels, and then we have, I'll use the term, Rory used developed parks or whatever, all the rest. And if we say we'll tackle open space first and kind of go through tick off these things and say, so, what determines which parcels go into open space? What should be the allowed uses in an open space? Again, I think as Rory suggested, probably for most of us, should be a fairly straightforward. If it's not, I think that's, we'll have a great discussion. But I think as we've talked here, probably 90% of the discussion is going to be on the other part, the developed parks. And I think kind of using the open space as kind of, I'll call it somewhat training wheels to go through the process and say, okay, now we got it. And now we can really tackle the other one. Because I'm a little bit afraid that if we try to do everything, is the open space piece is kind of going to potentially get a little bit of short shift, because we're going to be talking a lot about, what should be included. We talked about it tonight. Should there be the street ends, should it, how are we gonna tackle Luther Burbank, the community center, Aubrey Davis? That's gonna take a lot of air out of the room in doing that. And so I would want to get kind of the temperature of the group here if we want to talk to the staff about tackling the open space piece first and going through that process, and then tackle the developed piece. And then we can kind of, we'll figure out at the end, exactly how do those two fit together? Are they like Roy suggested, and they may not, in the sense that, because again, as I looked at, and Roy mentioned, if you look at residential, there are within the residential zones, different uses or areas. And so this, I kind of look at it the same way. You got a park zone, but you've got a couple different types of parks, if you will. And they have different rules and regs along that. So anybody's kind of, maybe we'll just kind of anybody have any reaction to that? Let's start with that. And then we can do kind of just maybe a thumbs up, thumbs down. Commissioner Cohen.
Well, I like it's kind of a modification of the tiered approach.
Right,
kind of
exactly.
thing.
Yes.
So open space, developed, and then there's hybrids, right? But that'll become clearer as
Exactly.
you do the other ones.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, again, simplicity is another one. So as the city manager suggested, I think she's probably I don't want to put words in her mouth, but probably comfortable with two, and more than that may be problematic. But again, that's down the road. I'm just thinking about how do we kind of get this thing going and get some traction. And again, if you look at the inventory, open space, as in chapter 4, it's about half of our acreage or so, and it's about half of the parcels. So, hopefully we could kind of get something done fairly quickly. So any other comments about that? Commissioner Hay?
Yeah, are you suggesting that we do a tiered approach to this?
Yes.
And so the end result would be a tiered park zone? Is that correct?
It might be. I think we would approach it as a tiered approach. But at the end, there might be a way that you could combine them easily, maybe not. I don't know, but
What does
Got it.
tiered approach mean?
well, that would be you'd have open space and developed parks.
So you have two different zones.
Effectively two different zones.
Except-
And
yeah.
the question is, under a park zone, is it an A and a B? Is it a 1A and a 1B? I don't know kind of exactly how it would look at the very end, but I think conceptually, we've got these, kind of to the point about, well, the use of open space, primary use is quite a bit different than developed parks. And I think that's kind of where we're this idea of tiering or bifurcation would get at.
Got it. So rather as a means for diving into it,
Yeah,
just looking
exactly.
at different
Yeah.
sections like open space, and then ones that are public institution, and then look at the ones that are zoned as residential now, like just as a way of tackling it.
Well, yeah, I think we tackle the open space, and that would also give us some time to say, well, for all the other stuff, just like you mentioned, okay, so in developed parks, so, we've got some are public institution now, so forth, what should be in and what should maybe not be in.
Yeah, I like that. And I also wanted to ask, since we have Marie and Geraldine here, I don't know if they would feel comfortable sharing a little bit with us. We've heard from Planning Commission, we've had a chance to look at this, but we haven't heard from Open Space yet. So do you like that plan as well? And anything else to share?
Yes.
We like one-word answers.
So, thank you, Ashley. That was a great introduction. Is it not on? Oh, okay. So, I don't want to get ahead of Jessica because she promised to bring some stuff back, but for a little bit of background on the Open Space Trust Conservancy Board and the trust itself, I think it's real, a lot of us have always thought of it as Pioneer Park, but it's not. The trust agreement itself said you can put any open space into the trust. And I think that's something that's worth thinking about, and we put it in the pros plan, or you could put it in the pros plan for that very reason. And it provides an awful lot of protection to that land. It cannot be taken out of the trust for any reason whatsoever. It has to have both trustees and city council approve it, there has to be public comment. And the only reasons for taking it out is things like illegality of use or the property no longer conforms to the definition of open space. So it's not, it's a very protected status that I think we probably want to transfer to other open spaces in the community. And it also, I suggest that we go and look at some of the documents associated with the trust, because things like the definition of an open space, it's already in the trust agreement. So it's something that we could build on and use, and it's a pretty, I think it's been pointed out, open space is a pretty easy category to think about as opposed to the parks. And it's also one the community has developed pretty well already. You know, I guess what I'm saying is the trust board would like to be able to be sort of the moving force and sort of putting together what the open space zone is. And we can do that, and you guys don't have to go through our documents and do it as well. But I think in terms of the zoning, we'd like to propose an open space zone that in time we could think about, does the zone then become also the property that gets transferred into the trust? And then what you end up with is a community board that's dedicated to looking at open space issues and preservation. And we don't have a sort of dual track going on. And I think, you know, that's citizen effective, but it's also city council or city staff effective, so that they have two separate things but not have to combine them. So I guess that's sort of and I'm not talking, the trust board actually hasn't had a chance to get together and talk. So please take these as personal comments. But I think you would get support from the trust board as well.
Okay, Jerry.
Yeah.
And there's an opportunity, I know on the slide deck that said we would talk about public input. Well, I also wanted to put forward that it would be wonderful to pull the Open Space Conservancy Trust Board together. Our next meeting is in April, and it feels like that's late for input, but it'd be great if the Trust Board could have a special meeting, perhaps in March or at the appropriate time, in order for the Trust Board to give a solid voice on where we are on these issues. So look forward to working with staff on that.
Okay,
I mean,
okay.
that idea.
Yeah. Commissioner Cohen?
One more comment on your suggestion. Because of the categories of these different properties being from the PROS plan, for example, Wildwood Park is not listed as open space. And I think of that as, you know, a nice trail system with the off-leash dog area. I don't think there's any development in Wildwood Park. So there may be some other examples of that. Another example that's a hybrid, but an important one, is the half of Island Crest Park. You know, and if there is one place that it might be worth exploring, you know, separating properties out into different zones, there's got to be an easy legal description, delineation of that, so that that's protected in a different way from the ball fields and the tennis court and the bike skills area. So there may be some other examples.
Yeah, and I would think that when we get to, let's say if we tackle open space first, when we get to zoning designation, you know, what determines which lands are in, we would have that discussion, and somebody, you know, could propose, if it wasn't on the list, saying, well, what about this? You know, we believe this meets the definition, and we could have that discussion. Yeah, Commissioner. Or board member, I guess.
I thought maybe I would just read you one. This is the open space property definition in the trust agreement, because I think it's pretty all-inclusive. Open space property means any undeveloped parcel of real property, although not necessarily completely natural and undisturbed, whose existing openness, natural condition, or present state of use, if retained, would maintain or enhance the present or potential conservation of natural or scenic resources of Mercer Island, and which have been declared to be open space property by the city council. So, I mean, I think that's a
Yeah.
a really good definition to start with. It may not need to be added to.
Yeah, and I think that as the city manager said, I think there's somebody on staff taking notes, and I would think that that would be a great starting point. Anything else on this side? Kind of going back and forth here. Well, let's just kind of do a thumbs up. Does that sound like a good approach of bifurcating between, again, quote unquote, open space and call it developed parks, for lack of a better term, asking staff to kind of work through the open space process first, and then we would tackle the more probably difficult developed park piece?
That's fine with me. Do you need a motion, or were you just, are we gonna do this informally?
I was gonna do it informally, but I'm looking now at the city manager. What does staff need?
More time. So based on, thank you for the thoughtful discussion, and yes, we are taking notes. So it sounds like your request is at the next meeting to come back and work through the 5 components of what it would take to develop a zone specific to open space. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. I will tell you, and I'm going to think through this. I'm probably going to get a hold of Craig next week as well, since he's your liaison. I think this discussion has been really incredible. You are such a thoughtful group, and I appreciate that. And my gut is telling me right now, I don't think we're going to make it by May, and that is, we have a lot of work to do, but you're on the right path. And so I don't want to rush through this work. So I just wanted to disclose, I need to think about at our next meeting what we might be able to achieve by May for this year, and what we might need to look to next year. And Craig, maybe you and we have a check-in meeting next week. Since you're the liaison, we can strategize a bit on that. That's not to say, and I want to say this again, I'm proud of you. You guys this is exactly what we needed. I think we just need to be reasonable about what we can actually get done and have a good product at the end.
Vice Chair.
So with that in mind, is there a problem with setting a goal for May 8th to define one of the zones and basically push the second zone into the next year? So establish a zone for open space 2024, and then we do develop parks in the comprehensive plan 2025.
Yeah, that I will say that is exactly where my head was going. Was I think this community, I think this commission, the city council wants to see us making progress. This is really complicated, maybe a little more than we thought when we put it on the work plan. But let's get something done, and recommend to the council that part 2 be picked up next year. Now, the council just had a long discussion about what's on the plate. But since this is living in the Parks Commission and not the Planning Commission right now, Craig, I'll share with you. I think we could do this work over the next couple of years, and work collaboratively between the 2 commissions represented here tonight. But I like that. So maybe let us get working on your open space request. Seems like a really good place to start. Let me talk to Craig. Let me talk to the mayor, chair. I'd like to follow up with you and the vice chair, and think about what we could accomplish this year.
Oh, and just as a follow-up, maybe it's appropriate in those discussions that we look at flipping that, tackle the hairiest part this year, and then that makes a follow-up that much easier next year. I don't know which is the right path, but
well, now I do not like what you just said.
Whoops.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I just don't know where is the right path.
Yeah.
Focus on, let's get something done by May 8th, what is both practical and feasible.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd that idea.
Flipping that?
Yeah. because as the city manager said, I think the most people care about protecting
The
open space. And so if you want to, if we're going to get bogged down in something over a multi-year period, it's going to be more likely to be the developed stuff,
Yeah.
and we wind up getting nothing,
Right,
either legally, politically, administratively, or whatever it is. So I liked Rory's triaging. I preferred that.
And I'm fine with, I just didn't know which is the best path to get to something on May 8th. Simple might be overly simple. And that's not a bad
It'll be
thing.
done next month. Then.
Yeah, yeah,
We can start with training wheels and then
yeah.
gradually get better.
You saw the city manager blanch when you made that, so you know which is more difficult.
Yeah.
Commissioner Markson.
I think I just wanted to clarify something before we did the thumbs up and thumbs down. When I heard both of you put the proposal of talking, open space and then other types of space, I thought it was, like in my mind, I was thinking that we didn't know necessarily, we weren't necessarily saying we wanted two types of zones up front. We were just going to explore it as evaluating like the maybe most restrictive, or however we want to describe it,
Right.
type of space, and then kind of check the next one and see, okay, is this one zone or is this two? Like, we would keep asking that question as we went. But the conversation kind of went already to two zones, so I just wanted to check if I was where we were on that. Go ahead.
Commissioner Westford.
I was definitely thinking in terms of two zones.
Okay.
I was looking at the map and I was seeing multiple residential zones and thinking we can simplify this very complex problem in a way by dividing it. And roughly half our, as Chair Struck noted, roughly half our park system is open space. And I think there is probably a relatively, I might be optimistic about this, but a relatively easy consensus that can be gained around the issue of what we want to do with our open space areas on the island. And so we could tackle that one and then address the far more complicated question of our developed parks. Because by the original draft language that we reviewed before to me, it was a real problem of trying to fit all of our different types of parks under a standard set of language. And it raised a lot of concern and comments in the community about, well, why are we authorizing buildings, or why are we authorizing this? We don't want to see any of that in open space. And so if we focus on open space, we can narrow down the range of issues, I think, pretty quick. And then develop that and as one type of park zone, and then look at the remaining parks as a second type of zoning.
Okay, thanks
That
for
was
that.
my intent.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I think then that leads me to a second question. I don't disagree with you, first of all, but, and not that maybe that matters too much, but what I'm wondering is there must be something detrimental to having more than one zone that maybe legally, or no? Okay, you're shaking your head.
Not, I wouldn't say detrimental. It is double the work. And, remember, as we're writing zoning code and it's being adopted, it's being used by our planning department to steward those spaces. So there's a cascade effect, right? We have to have a permit process, it's just, a new zone is a really big deal. Coming into this meeting, I will be honest with you, I was very concerned about, how are we going to do two zones? I think where you've landed is, I think, a really reasonable recommendation is do the open space zone first. There's just a natural nexus there. I feel confident that we can get that done by May, and recommended to the council that there's a part two that we'd like to work on, and that those blanks on your calendar that your planning schedule that Ryan showed you early have just all evaporated because we'll just keep working on this. There's some technical things. I'm not going to get into it tonight, but the council has to actually, docket this work to happen next year. So just know that there's some things we have to take care of. I don't think it's detrimental. What I am encouraged by is just, again, the thoughtfulness that you're putting into this and really thinking about how do we get this right. My panic was, I don't know that we're going to get there by May and deal with all these properties. So I like where we're headed. You have my support as a city manager. I feel like this is a much more sane approach. And somebody just said it, over half of our properties are open space. So we can say successfully, hopefully, that we've protected under a new zone half of our properties, and the other ones will be addressed soon. I do want to say one thing: many of your parks, like Luther Burbank, Homestead, Island Crest, are both open space and park. And so I'm we can talk more about that at the next meeting, but as we talk about an open space zone, I'm thinking, and tell me if you're thinking something differently, these are the properties that are classified as open space right now. They get rezoned, and then we need to thoughtfully deal with those other properties that have a whole heck of a lot more going on, from active uses to open space. Is that your thinking?
Commissioner Westberg.
That's my thinking, unless there's a way, for example, at Island Crest, and Commissioner Cohen alluded to this, where you could identify that separate, that open space area as a separate parcel and include it.
There's not a process that we could do by May. Okay. So let me, what you're talking about is a subdivision process where we're subdividing parcels. So that would be something we could put on our list to think through.
That would. Okay, yeah. So then the focus would be just the areas that are currently identified.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So kind of a follow-up to that, I'm trying to remember the in chapter 4, the inventory, or the chapter 5, the inventory. Like, for example, I thought that for example, at Mercerdale, they have Mercerdale Park as kind of a developed park, and then they have the Mercerdale Hillside as open space. So are we suggesting that we could not put the hillside into the open space zone at this point? We couldn't separate that, or?
If it's a separate parcel already, and I don't have the zoning map pulled up, then the answer is yes. That parcel that is open space could be zoned as open space. If for example, it's Luther Burbank Park, where you've got a big mega parcel or a handful of parcels, we couldn't do it that fast. Right. We'd really, and I by the way, I'm supportive of having the subdivision conversation, but I need to think through like what do we need to think about? That's a whole lot of staff work as well. So let's keep that on the list.
Yeah, and that's fair. I think that, again, we can express where we want to get to. And again, we may not be able to get there by May, but I think as long as we kind of express where we want to head, that's fine. Commissioner Westberg.
On the pros plan on the park list identified 218 acres as classified open space. And they identified an additional 68 acres as open space, but included in other parks. So that gives you an idea of the difference.
Peter?
Oh, Commissioner Cohen.
Just to come back, even though it would be more work, I don't want to lose sight of the Island Crest Park thing, because we have, with the bike skills area, we have a specific community group that was very interested in that. I know that you'll keep it in mind, but I'm not ready to say, okay, let's not worry about Island Crest Park until we get to the whole big shebang of all the developed parks, because just topographically, I don't think it's going to be a big issue. I don't know what the process is for subdividing. I know that it's more complex than some things, but anyway, I'd like to keep that one at least on the table for possibly being done this year for all the reasons we heard during the bike skills area discussion.
So if I may respond, Chair, real quick, I would like to, what I would like to recommend to the Parks and Rec Commission that we do. So for our next meeting, and we're going to go ahead with 2 meetings a month to hit that May deadline, is we'll focus on the open space. But I'd like us to also think about what is our proposal to the council, right? So I actually have been given a charge to develop a park zone, and it's coming together differently than we probably all anticipated. I need to go back to the council in a timely fashion, probably this spring, and take to them, with your support, probably the chair and vice chair will join me, a recommendation on how we propose to complete this work. We're going to keep working on the open space zone. And, dear city council, these are the other things that we recommend that we add to the work plan. And I'm even going to take it a step further in this sequence. Because some of the work that we want to do, I can see this kind of spanning out a year or 2 or more, given the backdrop of everything else going on at the city. So let's just be thinking about what the commission's recommendation is to the council on how that the rest of the body of work will be developed, and we'll help you, right? We'll help prepare the memo, but that's probably the other important discussion we need to have at the next meeting.
Thank you. Fair enough. Okay. Well, I did have one other question regarding the purpose statement, kind of at the top of the house. Would you envision a purpose statement for open space being different than for developed parks? Or again, I was going to go back tomorrow and look at in residential, whether residential has one purpose statement for the R, and then if it's R8, it's something, it's the same purpose statement, but it has different regs. You know how that works?
Yep. Yeah. My gut reaction is that your open space properties are unique and distinctly different from your active parks. And that we would, if we're going to recommend a separate zone, that we would benefit from a distinct purpose statement. So I'm looking at this as it's a whole zoning code just on open space.
Got it.
And by the way, I am going to call the planning director first thing tomorrow morning and see what kind of grief I've caused here. But I'm his boss, so I guess I get to tell him the grief I'm causing him.
Okay, any final comments, or we'll call this a wrap on the park zone discussion for this evening? All right, seeing none. Thank you, city manager, safe travels, and the rest of the staff that was involved. We appreciate it. The 6th item of business this evening is absences and commissioner reports. Seeing no absences, not worried about that. Commissioners, do you have anything to report? Well, I'll go. As Ryan talked about earlier, the senior resource fair on Saturday, I was both an attendee and I guess a quasi vendor for our organization. And it was wonderful. There was everybody I talked to was so positive about it. Yeah, it was really well attended, and so it was a great event. Commissioner Cohen.
I think absences are if anybody's going to be absent in the future. Isn't that what that
Well,
is about?
yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, but I'm not, but I think, but.
Thank you.
But I had another comment after absences.
My ability to attend the April 4th meeting is somewhat in doubt depending on the airline schedule. So I'm supposed to be flying, but I can't remember exactly what time.
Okay.
But, so I will likely miss that meeting.
Right. We'll consider it a planned absence, but
Yeah.
if you show up, that's great.
I'm going to try.
On the report side of things, I mentioned this to a few of the commissioners in passing. I know when I was on the Open Space Conservancy Trust, we tried to carpool to meetings thinking that, or ride bicycles or whatever it is. That's with respect to the city council member. And it always seemed inconsistent with trying to be stewards of the environment to have 7 or so cars coming each time. So at least some of us are going to try to organize that. We won't discuss any business on the way up from the south end, but it seemed to make sense and people were receptive to that idea.
Yeah, just don't have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Let's see here. Okay, so the next Park and Recs Commission meeting is a special meeting on March 21st, 2024 at 5 p.m. The time is now 7:20 p.m. and the meeting is adjourned and I get to do this. However, as a reminder to commissioners, please stay seated until the city staff has terminated the Zoom broadcast. Good evening and stay healthy and safe. Thank you very much.